everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Camilla, and today you may notice a different background. It's because I'm at my in-laws, so we decided really last minute to come down to my husband's family home. So yeah, here we are. As it's arriving toward the end of the year, I thought it's time to look forward to 2022 in a way, right? We're all hoping 2022 will be better yet again, but we shall see. In terms of reading, I have a few videos coming up with my reading plans for 2022. But today, what I'm going to be talking about are the 22 classics that I want to read in 2022. And I thought at first that 22 was maybe a large number, and then I started making a list and realized that that's actually not as much as you think when you're making a list of wishes, which you know if you've been following my channel that all of these TBRs of mine are very much wish list. They're usually a mile long, but I love talking about these books. I love to plan. That's just part of my personality, and I look forward to kind of making these lists and then diving to some of them. But I'm very much of a mood reader, so when comes the month or the time to read them, maybe I don't pick them up. But anyway, that's a story for another time, right? So right now we're going to go through my list of 22 classics, starting with Virginia Woolf. I say Virginia Woolf, and I know that's not a book. She's an author of the early kind of 20th century. Because I've only ever read Orlando, and that was my first year of university, which is eons ago, I've decided to go through a year of Virginia Woolf. So I will be reading her 9 novels in 2022, which already, and I said it was really quick for me to make a list of 22 novels. It's because 9 of them were Virginia Woolf. I have read Orlando, but I think I want to reread it, mostly because, as I said, it's been so long. My English wasn't all that good back then. I feel like I have a different perspective on life now, feminism, but also just life. I'm at least 10 or 11 years older than I was back then. So yeah, so I'll be reading all of them. I have the list here. You may already know all of her novels, but I'll still list them out. So the first one, written in 1915, was The Voyage Out. Then that was followed by Night and Day, 1919, Jacob's Room in 1922, Mrs. Dalloway in 1925, which is like a famous one. One of my best friends gave me this book for our birthday years ago. That's when I started it, but I never finished it. Don't know why. To the Lighthouse in 1927. Then we have Orlando, a Biography in 1928, which is the one I've read before. I think it was in a gender and sexuality class. Then we have The Waves in 1931, The Years in 1937, and Between the Acts in 1941. So that's quite a list, and maybe I'm totally going ahead of myself by making this list, because maybe one of her books will take me much longer to read than I'm expecting. At this point, I'm getting maybe one a month or one every 6 weeks will do fine. But maybe some of these classic books sometimes take a bit more out of you. I don't know how long they are. I don't know what they're about. Like I said, except for Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse, Orlando and the Waves, which is maybe half, but the other 5, I have no idea what they're about. So we shall see. The next part of my list is the Bronte sisters, which is 7 books total. Well, their novels anyway. So if you followed me during October 2021, you'll know that I read Jane Eyre, and it was my first Bronte, and I was very keen and pleased, and I loved it. I think she became one of my favorite literary characters. Even though as a novel I thought it wasn't like the best novel I've ever read, but as a character, definitely my favorite. She's a great heroine. And yeah, so I want to keep going with the Brontes. I thought that this year, so I read Jane Austen this year, and I wanted to do Brontes as well. But then, I think my mind went into very many different kind of spaces, and I read loads of different things. But I decided to kind of push that goal into 2022. Because I've read Jane Eyre, it means that it's only 6 books. Only 6 books. For Charlotte Bronte, we have Villette, which was written in 1853. We then have Shirley in 1849, The Professor in 1857. Then we have Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, which was written in 1847. Then we have Anne Bronte, who also released Agnes Grey in 1847. And the last one, well, not really the last one, but on this list is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, written in 1848. So, quite a list. I'm not gonna lie, out of all of these, I think I'd only ever heard of Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre. So I'm quite excited for all of them. I think the most excited I am with is Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Bronte. I think during October, like loads of people were talking about it, and I was like, it sounds so interesting, and I can't wait to read it. I may start with that one. I don't know. How do you think I should read the Bronte sisters? How did you approach them? Did you read them in order of publication? Did you go by sisters to sisters? Like, let me know. I would love to know how you approach that. Because yeah, I want to read all of their novels in 2022. So if you've been counting with me, you'll know that we're at 15 books already out of 22. So we only have 7 left, which is why my list went out of hand a little bit. But I tried to rein it in. Anyway, so obviously because Woolf and the Bronte sisters are white women, I realized that my list was going to be extremely white, so I kind of went out of my way a little bit to find some authors of color who've written the classics that I felt like I wanted to read at this point right now. It doesn't mean that in 6 months, you know, I won't want to approach something maybe a bit harder. But at the moment, I went with these books. They're a mix of Victorian novels that I really want to read and which potentially are plans for next October. Because I want to kind of come to it with plans rather than like this year I was a bit like last minute, you know, I have Middlemarch in my library, I will read it, which I still haven't finished. Anyway, so I've picked a few things. At first, I'm not gonna lie, I was like, oh, what if I go with reading all of James Baldwin's novels as well? And then I realized that Baldwin, Bronte's, and Woolf would already put me over the 22 novels, which is why I was like, okay, maybe not. So my plan is to start with James Baldwin's first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, which was published in 1953 and which is apparently semi-autobiographical. So it sounded really, really interesting. I really want to read If Beale Street Could Talk, but I decided to start with his first novel. I have already read Giovanni's Room, which was again in the same class that I read Orlando. Actually, I think it was Gender and Sexuality. But I still think that I could reread it. I feel like I would get more from it now. So yeah, I'll start with his first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, and then we can see how it goes from there. Maybe, you know, I want to keep going and read all of his novels in 2022, or maybe, you know, in 2023 he becomes kind of like the next Woolf or Bronte and I read all his novel that year. So yeah, so that'll be my first one. Then I thought, in the video that I did with Jay from My Quarter Life Crisis, we talked about, well, you saw on her channel, one of the books that I recommended her in our buddy read was Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery, which is kind of a Canadian classic. We've discussed about reading more of the series because it's quite enchanting and lovely. So I've put Anne of Avonlea on my list here of classics to read in 2022. So Anne of Avonlea by L.M. Montgomery, quite exciting. I also have in my library To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, which I've never read. It is a classic. I know like that loads of people growing up, that's one of the books they read in school. Obviously I grew up kind of in French, you know, so we read Voltaire and stuff like that. So I thought, you know, it's maybe time that I pick it up. I have a copy. I think my mom read it last year and she was telling me how touching it was, so I was like, okay, it's time that I read it. So I've added it to my list, and also help me tackle, you know, a book that I own, which is always good. Next is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I think that I read in an abridged version when I was little, because I read loads when I was little, and I can't imagine that I would have read this entire book, and it's quite long, so yeah, so I can't imagine it. But it's on my list. I really want to read it in French, obviously. I'd rather not read it in English. So I will see if I can get a copy anywhere in the UK. But maybe if I actually get to go home in 2022, which I'm sure I will, I will maybe pick up a copy. Maybe my parents have a copy at home, or maybe I even have a copy. Like, we'll see. We'll see when we go to Canada. Then I know I'm going through them quite quickly, but I feel like these are a lot of classics that loads of people know. So the next one is again not really a novel. It's just that I really want to read my first Dickens, and by want is that I feel like I am at that point where I need to do it. I have read A Christmas Carol, which is the only Dickens thing I've ever read. I think at home actually we have this copy of different Dickens novels. Like, it's like one large book, which they're nice to have, but I hate to read them because how am I supposed to read a book that's like 2,000 pages long? I just, yeah, struggle with that. I'm kind of leaning toward reading David Copperfield, but some people have recommended Great Expectations as the first Dickens. I would love to know what you think. Again, I'm asking you because I know like there's loads of Victorian novel like enthusiasts, especially like through Victober that I've met. Loads of people who love Dickens as well and who know more about his writing than me, obviously. So yeah, like which one would you recommend as a newbie Dickens reader? Which one do you think I should start with? These are kind of my two choices, but I'm very open to something else if you think I should start with something else. Next, when I was actually Googling like classics by authors of color, I came up on a couple books, obviously from Latin America, but I already have plans to read some of them, so they're kind of in a different list, which will be coming in a video later this week. So I found this I Am a Cat by Natsume Sotsuki, which is a book written in 1905. I feel like I'd seen this book recently because there's all these Japanese books about cats, which I think I read one this year. So I thought, oh, I didn't realize this was a classic, that this was so old. You know, I've heard great things about it. So I thought that I would pick this one up, and I'm quite excited for it actually, because I think it had been kind of on my list when I'd seen it like on the library app, and I'd added it to my wish list, and I was like, oh, I'll come at some point, but it's a classic, so I'm adding it to my classics TBR. And then, okay, I have 2 left, and I'm realizing that I think we're getting to 23 books. But let's pretend not. You know, it's more like plans for reading 2022 books in 2022, you know? So the last 2, well, the penultimate one is The Stranger by Albert Camus. I want to reread this one because now I have to admit these things to people. So this used to be my favorite book. I read it when I was in college. I must have been 17 or 18, and I think I was going through a very much like existentialist kind of phase, and you know, I was like a writer and I was like going through this, and I thought that this was so smart and so interesting. Maybe part of me was like, I'm gonna sound so smart if that's my favorite book, you know? I don't know. I just remember just really loving this book, and it's quite short, it's a novella, so I want to reread it because I want to finally finish the Merceau Investigation by Camille Daou and do a kind of video reviewing both, because the Merceau Investigation is basically like a modern response to this book, and especially in its kind of post-colonial messaging and experience. So I want to read both and do a video discussing that, and I think that'll be interesting. So that's kind of on my list to reread. And finally, the last book on my list, which is technically number 23, is The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. If you've seen my Victober TBR for this year, I had added this to my TBR because it sounded so interesting and I really was kind of attracted to read it. But I think it was something like 30 hours, 35 hours long, like the audiobook. So I was like, oh, that's quite a long one. So I knew that I wasn't going to get to it. But I'm kind of thinking ahead to Victober, and yeah, so I'm adding it to my list. I may not get to it, but it's kind of an interest of mine to read it. It is a classic of Victorian literature. I've never read any Anthony Trollope. I'd never heard of him before Victober, actually. So I think that'll be interesting. So yeah, so it's quite a bizarre list. I'm very aware, very heavy on the Victorian literature, but I feel like that's a huge part of literary kind of period that I've missed out during my education in literature, and a bunch of other classics that I've picked up here and there that I just really want to read. And I feel like Woolf is one of these things where I'm a feminist, and I feel like I should have read some of her, you know, work. So yeah, so I'm hoping I will get to all of these in 2022. I'm very excited. If you are also excited about any of these books, let me know. Maybe we can do a collab and do a buddy read, you know, just let me know. In the meantime, let me know if you have any classics that you're planning on reading in 2022. You know, love to see what people have read before, what they're really looking for to rereading. I feel like I've seen loads of those recently on these classics TBR for 2022. So yeah, all very exciting. Thank you so much for watching, and I see you back. Bye!